National League North review for January, let's get into it. So this is how the table looked going into January. It's a fascinating battle at the top with both Scunthorpe and Tamworth level on 53 points. Chorley are 10 points behind in third, then Hereford, Scarborough, Chester and Curzon make up the rest of the playoffs. As for the bottom half, Kings, Lynn, Gloucester, Darlington and Bishop Stortford make up the relegation zone. So there was a handful of games played on New Year's Day, and we'll start with a tasty local derby between Brackley and Banbury, which is a game that always has a bit of needle to it. And it was Brackley who went 2-0 up within the first 25 minutes thanks to two-headed goals from striker Connor Hall, making his debut after signing on loan from Solihull Moors. He scored 20 goals for Chorley last season, so it's no surprise to see him back amongst the goals at this level. There's always plenty of animosity in this derby, and that spilled onto the terraces as crowd trouble saw the match stop momentarily. But getting back to the game, Banbury pulled a goal back in the 52nd minute, and I think Elliot Wheeler was trying to cross the ball to the back post, but if he actually meant that, then fair play. But sadly for Banbury, Brackley were a class above, and in the 62nd minute, Connor Hall completed his hat-trick with a sublime finish to win the game 3-1. And what a way to make your debut and introduce yourself to the fans. A hat-trick against your local rivals, putting Brackley up into 8th. And as for Banbury, to make matters worse for them after the game, some very heavy rainfall left the pitch completely submerged underwater. Banbury's ground sits right on the bank of the River Cherwell, so when that floods, the ground floods, and it was no surprise to see Banbury's next home game against Peterborough Sports postponed. Now on to an important game at both ends of the table, as 4th place Hereford were up against 22nd place Gloucester, and it was Hereford who took the lead just before half-time. Andy Williams plays a 1-2 with Alex Babos and curls the ball into the bottom left to put Hereford 1-0 up. At the start of the second half, Hereford had a flurry of good chances and really should have put the game to bed, but they allowed Gloucester back into the game, and in the 78th minute, Gloucester made it 1-1 for a Ben Beresford header. Hereford's biggest strength this season has been their ability to nick goals late on and grind out wins even when they're not playing well, but they had to settle for a point as the game finished 1-1. Chester's 8-game unbeaten run came to an end as they put in a really poor performance away at Warrington. Josh Amos got the only goal of the game 4 minutes in to give Warrington the 1-0 win, and that's now 4 consecutive wins at home for Warrington. In their first season at the National League North level, they sit only 3 points off the playoffs. So after January the 1st, Hereford's draw keeps them in 4th, defeat for Chester moves them down into 7th as Curzon leapfrog them into 5th, Brackley's win puts them up into 8th outside the playoffs on goal difference, and a win for Boston puts them into 9th. There's not much change at the bottom, but Gloucester's draw at Hereford puts them 6 points from safety. On to Saturday the 6th of January, and we'll start with top of the table Scunthorpe at home to Boston, and it took 10 minutes for Scunthorpe to take the lead for a Danny Elliott penalty. Scunthorpe had been much the better side, but against the run of play, Boston got the equaliser. An in-swinging corner hits the post, rebounds out to defender Tom Leake, who manages to score, bringing the game to 1-1. But in the 42nd minute, Scunthorpe's lead was restored, with Danny Elliott's second goal of the game, and Boston can consider themselves lucky that it was only 2-1 at half-time, as Scunthorpe really should have been out of sight with the amount of chances they created. But in the second half, Boston came out looking like a different team. They really went for the game and put Scunny under a lot of pressure, and as a result, Scunthorpe had to sit back and try to hold on to their 2-1 lead. But in the 91st minute, Scunthorpe failed to clear the ball, and Jake Hazel equalised for Boston to get the 2-2 draw. So with Scunthorpe slipping up, Tamworth had the chance to go top if they could beat Buxton, and they took their opportunity with a 2-0 win. They left it late with both goals coming in the 82nd and 90th minute, but this game was a bit of a slog for Tamworth. Buxton were very well organised, and it took Kai Williams coming off the bench to really change the game for Tamworth. This wasn't their best performance, but they got the win, and that puts them up into first, 2 points ahead of Scunthorpe. Now on to third place Chorley, who were beaten 2-0 away at Alfreton, and Alfreton are such a physical team, and they repeatedly bullied Chorley off the ball, who looked so weak physically in the midfield. And of all the games for Mike Calverley to miss, it had to be this one. He is the enforcer in that midfield for Chorley, who can cover the ground and win those midfield battles, and they were crying out for his presence in this game. But that win puts Alfreton up into 8th, 1 point outside of the playoff positions. It was an all-playoff affair as 6th place Scarborough at home to 4th place Hereford, and with Chorley's defeat, a win for either of these sides will put them into 3rd, and Scarborough took the lead 26 minutes in through Alex Green, whose pace was something that Hereford struggled to deal with all game. Then things became even more difficult for Hereford as Alex Babos was taken off injured, then striker Jason Cowley was given a straight red for an off-the-ball incident which wasn't caught on camera. And from then on, Scarborough were very comfortable, and they suffered a big blow in the lead up to this game with the news that York were recalling Finlay Barnes, and he's been so good for them going forward, and you wondered how him him leaving might affect them, but Scarborough went out and signed winger Don McHale, who had just been released by Brackley, and he came straight into the team to replace Barnes and had a fantastic game. His willingness to get on the ball and run at defenders caused Hereford lots of problems, but an Alex Green hat-trick gives them the 3-0 win to put Scarborough up into third, and Jonathan Greening is doing a superb job. Now on to Chester, who were looking so good before the new year and were on an excellent run of form, but they were beaten away at Warrington last match day, and now they suffered their first home defeat since September, losing 1-0 to 20th place Rushall Olympic. A Rico Brown header was enough to give Rushall a win, but it really could have been 5-0 if it wasn't for Will Stanley and the Chester goal, but a much needed 3 points for Rushall, which takes them up into 18th. So in last month's video I talked about how Kings Lynn were in some financial trouble. Owner Stephen Cleeve came out and said that Kings Lynn needed £300,000 in order to make it to the end of the season. Just one tier down in the Northern Premier League, we saw Mark United have to resign due to not having the money to see out the season, and also Nuneaton Borough, who have withdrawn from the Southern League Premier Central, and that was looking like something that could happen to Kings Lynn, but it appears that help has arrived, as Kings Lynn announced that a deal had been made with a Singaporean businessman, which according to the statement will provide fresh funds into the club for the purpose of expansion, player development and acquisitions. Now this seems like it's good news, but people are also rightly sceptical, and there's not a huge amount of detail known about the deal, but let's hope that Kings Lynn can put their financial troubles behind them and this deal works out for them. Now getting to on-pitch matters for Kings Lynn, it was a huge game at the bottom of the table as they faced 23rd place Darlington, and this game looked like it was heading to a 0-0 draw, but in the 92nd minute the first real bit of quality showed as a well-worked move put Mitch Curry through on goal, who finished well to give Darlington the 1-0 win, and based on this performance Kings Lynn desperately need some new faces through the door with this investment, and it's a defeat that leaves them 3 points from safety. So looking at the table after those games, Tamworth's win sees them go into first, 2 points ahead of Scunthorpe. Scarborough move up into third with Chorley, Hereford, Brackley and Curzon making up the playoffs. As for the relegation zone, Kings Lynn are 21st, 3 points off safety. Gloucester and Darlington both sit 7 points from safety, and Bishop start for the bottom of the table, 12 points from safety. Now on to Tuesday the 9th of January, where we had a couple of matches played, and we'll start with the league leaders Tamworth, who got a massive 3-0 win away at Warrington, and with Scunthorpe not playing, this extends their lead at the top to 5 points, but Scunthorpe do have a game in hand, and Tamworth have been on a very good run of form, but the last couple of wins have been games where they haven't necessarily been at their best. It's just been a case of getting the job done, but this performance was Tamworth at their very best, ridiculously well organised. Warrington liked to keep possession and move the ball on the floor, but with that energy that Tamworth play at, they caught Warrington dawdling on the ball so often and just didn't allow Warrington to play the game. Then when Tamworth got the ball, they played at pace and moved the ball very well, and it was just an impressive performance against a team who hadn't lost at home since October, and that win puts Tamworth 5 points clear at the top and puts a lot of pressure onto Scunthorpe. At the bottom of the table, Southport got a massive 3 points with a 2-0 win at home to relegation rivals Darlington, and it's not looking good for Darlington, completely toothless up front. They have lots of possession every game, but it's never converted into meaningful chances. Will Hatfield, who's been Darlington's best player this season, has even started to look poor the last few games, which is a concern. Striker Akwazi Asante was brought in back in November, and he was supposed to be the shining light that would bang the goals in once he was up to full fitness, but 2 months in and he doesn't look like the same player that he once was. I could go on about Darlington's problems, but this defeat sees them 7 points from safety. Moving on to Saturday the 13th of January, we'll start with the league leaders Tamworth, who travelled away to 23rd place Darlington, and 12 minutes in we see this type of goal from Tamworth so often. A Tom Tanks long throw, which is such a useful weapon, they end up winning the ball in the box, and Ben Akwe finishes to put Tamworth 1-0 up. And that is how the game finished. It was the same story for Darlington, who just didn't know what to do with the ball in the final third, and they now sit 8 points off safety. So with Tamworth winning, the pressure was on Scunthorpe to win away at 6th place Brackley, but they slipped up and Brackley ended up winning 2-0. Scunthorpe are missing top scorer Danny Whitehall. They are now missing Jacob Butterfield through injury, who is way too good for this league and can win games himself with moments of individual brilliance. Connor Smith has now gone back to Hearts as his loan has expired, and Scunthorpe were unable to extend the deal due to an ongoing transfer embargo, and for the first time this season you look to that Scunthorpe bench and it looked quite weak. There was no real standout options to come on and change the game, and Tamworth had a wobble at the start of November where they lost 3 games in a row due to injuries, and now it's Scunthorpe's turn, and this defeat means Tamworth are now 8 points clear at the top of the table. On to Warrington versus Alfreton, where a penalty from Liam Waldock put Alfreton 1-0 up 6 minutes in. Warrington. I don't think there's a better team in the league than Alfreton when it comes to using their physicality to their advantage, and it happens so often where Alfreton bully sides off the ball in the opposition half and go and score, and in the 70th minute there was no better example of this as Adam Lynn bullies Bohan Dixon off the ball and they work the ball over to Billy Fooster, who puts Alfreton 2-0 up. Alfreton had defended so well and Warrington had barely had a sniff of goal, but in the 89th minute Andre Wisdom decided to go on a Messi-like dribble to pull a goal back and give Warrington some hope. There was then 5 minutes of added time, and with the last kick of the game, up stepped Warrington goalkeeper Dan Atherton for his second goal of the season. He already scored back in October to rescue a draw for Warrington against Farsley Celtic, and he does it again. The game finishes 2-2, and a win for Alfreton would have put them up into 5th, but instead they stay outside the playoffs in 8th. Now on to Rushall Olympic versus Spennymoor, and whilst this game is on, we're going to talk about Spennymoor's season so far. On November the 1st, they were sat in 4th position and were pretty much flying. They were up at the top competing with the likes of Scunthorpe and Tamworth. Since November the 1st, Spennymoor have played 12 games. Out of those 12 games, they've won 1, drawn 3 and lost 8. A horrendous run of form which has seen them slide all the way down the table from 4th to 16th. At the end of December, they sacked manager Lewis Dickman and they brought in Graham Lee, who was the manager of Marske United, and in his first 2 games against Brackley and Scarborough, there were some improvements, especially in terms of how well organised they looked, but against Rushall in his 3rd game in charge, they were all over the place defensively, and it seems to be 1 step forward then 2 steps back, and with Glenn Taylor out injured, who's been Spennymoor's top scorer for the last 7 seasons in a row, it is worrying times for them. As for Rushall Olympic, the 2 goals scored by Danny Waldron in this game would be the last 2 he would score in a Rushall Olympic shirt, as a National League North top scorer gets a move to Southend. 16 goals in 25 games for Waldron this season, and he will obviously be a big miss that will need replacing, but Rushall are a very well run club and I'm sure they'll use the money wisely. This game ended 4-3 to Rushall Olympic, which sees Spennymoor drop down to 17th, and they are now only 5 points away from the relegation zone. So at the end of that match day, Tamworth are now 8 points clear, although Scunthorpe do have a game in hand. But one thing I forgot to mention is that Tamworth now have a better goal difference than Scunthorpe, which is like another point in itself. It's all very tight around the playoffs, with only 3 points separated South Shields in 11th and Chorley in 5th. As for the relegation zone, Bishop Stortford sit 13 points off safety and they look as good as down now, and Gloucester, Darlington and King's Lynn are all still in trouble. Now on to Tuesday the 16th of January, we had 2 games played, and we'll start with 4th place Scarborough at home to 10th place Boston, where a win for Boston would take them up into 5th, but in the 32nd minute, Ollie Dyson, on his debut on loan from York, plays a lovely ball down the right to McHale, who gets the crossing, but the ball eventually falls to Alex Wiles, who puts Scarborough 1-0 up. Before the game, Scarborough were given a huge lift with the announcement that Aidan Rutledge's loan deal had been extended till the end of the season, and he scored an excellent goal to put the Sea Dogs 2-0 up. Boston got a goal back for a penalty to make it 2-1, but 7 minutes later Rutledge got his second of the game to put Scarborough 3-1 up and make it 8 goals in 12 games in his loan spell so far. Nicholson scored a brilliant consolation goal in the 95th minute, but it was too little too late as the game finished 3-2. On to Buxton, who have had a very similar season to Spennymoor. A fantastic start to the season saw them up in the playoffs, but a run of only 3 wins in their last 13 games has seen them slip all the way down to 19th, dangerously close to the relegation zone, so this was a massive victory away at Chester, where they got a goal very early on, then were brilliantly well organised for a hard-fought 1-0 win. It's been a bad start to the year for Chester, with 3 losses in 4 games, and they missed their chance to get back into the playoffs and remain in 9th. Now on to Saturday the 20th of January, where we saw a lot of frozen pitches, a lot of postponements, which meant only 4 games were played, and sadly the massive Tamworth versus Scunthorpe game was postponed, which is a shame. But as for the games that were played, we'll stay with Chester, who got back to winning ways with a 2-0 victory at home to bottom of the table Bishop Stortford. Jid O'Keefe had a very impressive debut for Chester at right wing back, getting man of the match, and he's on loan from Stockport and looks a very good addition. Also, it was great to see Kristen Norton get his first goal for Chester, as he's been getting a lot of stick since he was signed back in November. He played 23 games for Cheltenham in League One last year, and a lot of fans were very excited by the signing, but he hasn't really shown an awful lot since he's came in. But he came off the bench in this game and got a goal, so let's see if he can kick on, and that win puts Chester up into 4th. Now on to 3rd place Scarborough, who were up against 16th place Peterborough Sports, and it was Peterborough who took the lead 11 minutes in. A peach of a ball in from Dan Lawler saw Michael Gash prod the ball in to put Peterborough 1-0 up. Scarborough weren't at the best and it was an off day for their talented attacking lineup, but they did get the equaliser in the 54th minute thanks to Alex Wiles. Peterborough Sports played well and gave it a real good go, and they thought they'd gone 2-1 up with Dion Sembi-Ferris's lobbed effort, but it was ruled out for a foul on goalkeeper Ryan Whitley. The game finished 1-1, which is a point that keeps Scarborough in 3rd. On to Hereford against Kings Lynn, and this was looking like it was going to be a very routine win for Hereford when they found themselves 2-0 up in the first 30 minutes, thanks to goals from both Tom Pugh and Topi Obadiah. It was a very impressive first half display and Hereford really should have been out of sight. Then in the 51st minute, Hereford had the chance to put the game to bed and go 3-0 up, but Cissé's penalty was saved by Paul Jones, and 6 minutes later, instead of Hereford being 3-0 up, it ended up being 2-1 to Kings Lynn as Tom Hughes pulled a goal back to make it game on. Hereford continued to miss chances for fun and the Kings Lynn goalkeeper Paul Jones was superb keeping them in the game on his own, but that inability to kill the game off came back to bite them as in the 91st minute, a long throw-in and 3 flick-ons later, Cameron Hargreaves was there to give Kings Lynn the equaliser. The game finished 2-2 and Hereford will be furious at not getting the win, but this is a big point for Kings Lynn which puts them 2 points from safe. So at the end of January the 20th, Chester were the big movers, leaping from 9th up into 4th. Hereford's draw moves them up into 6th, but teams below them do have 2 or 3 games in hand over them, and Blythe's excellent run of form, going 6 games unbeaten, sees them climb up into 10th on the edge of the playoffs. At the bottom, Kings Lynn sit 2 points from safety, although teams above do have games in hand, so that gap could end up increasing, and Gloucester remain 22nd, 8 points from safety. Now on to Tuesday the 23rd of January, and we'll start with a huge game at the bottom of the table as 22nd place Gloucester travelled away to 20th place Banbury, and Gloucester took the lead 14 minutes in when Elliot Durrell played a lovely ball in behind to Harry Emmett, who squared the ball to striker Theo Robinson. And yes, that is the Theo Robinson who's played in the Championship for the likes of Millwall, Derby, Doncaster and Huddersfield. It's safe to say that his best days are behind him, but Gloucester have brought him in till the end of the season and he's made a good start. In the 66th minute, Banbury found an equaliser through Emmanuel Madger with a very nice finish. The big criticism of Gloucester has been that they just don't look like they have the ability to break teams down, but they created so many chances in this game, and in the 68th minute, Ben Beresford gets the winner with a touch then volley, a massive 2-1 win to bring Gloucester 5 points from safety and give them some hope. As for Banbury, the board decided they'd seen enough and sacked manager Mark Jones, sat 20th, 2 points above the relegation zone with only 1 win in their last 10 games. This was always going to be a difficult job for Jones. This was his first season in charge, and when he came in, Banbury only had 1 player left from last season. All the momentum that was built from their first season in the National League North was gone, and let's see who they appoint to try and turn things around. With Banbury's defeat, a win for Kings Lynn would take them out of the relegation zone, but they were well beaten by a superb Curzon Ashton side who completely outclassed Kings Lynn. Curzon were well up for this game considering back in September, manager Adam Lakeland left Curzon after 10 games to join Kings Lynn, and this is a poor result for them. At the start of the episode I talked about Kings Lynn's new investment, and that's allowed them to bring in some new players, but they just don't seem to have settled in. They actually look worse off for bringing in the new signings. It was a very disjointed performance, but as for Curzon, they were excellent, and that's now 5 games unbeaten, and this win takes them up into the playoffs into 7th. On to another team who received a hammering, and that's Buxton, who lost 6-0 at home to Warrington. And this was a bizarre game in that for the first 60 minutes Buxton were in the game, they'd had chances and there wasn't much to split the two sides. Then Buxton just had a complete collapse, and in their last match away to Chester I was praising how well organised they were and how defensively solid they were, and this was the exact same lineup that started in that game, but they just completely fell apart. Warrington were missing 3 of the best players as well in captain Josh Amis. Defenders Andre Wisdom and Andy White were both struggling with illness, so I was not expecting them to put in this kind of performance, but they were superb. Isaac Buckley-Ricketts got a hat-trick to put him onto 11 goals for the season, and this win puts them up into 13th. Onto a big game in the race for playoffs as 7th place Chorley were at home to 4th place Chester, but this was a very comfortable 2-0 win for Chester. They've had a mixed January, winning 3 and losing 2, but this was their first real good performance of the month, and the difference was that for this game, strikers Tom Piers and Charlie Caton returned from injury and were back in the lineup, and it is so important that Chester keep these two fit from now till the end of the season. As for Chorley, they haven't beaten a single one of the top 6 sides this season, and this defeat sees them slip out of the playoffs into 8th. So with Scunthorpe's game against Darlington postponed, Tamworth had the chance to extend their lead at the top to 11 points, but they drew 0-0 at home to Boston, and there's no highlights posted of this game, so we'll just move on. So at the end of January the 23rd, Tamworth sit 9 points above Scunthorpe, but Scunthorpe do have 2 games in hand. Scarborough are really starting to cement their position in the playoffs as they sit 9 points above 8th place Chorley, but with both Chorley and Alfreton in 8th and 9th having games in hand over the teams above them, the playoffs could all change. At the bottom, despite being on a very poor run of form, Kings Lynn are only 2 points from safety. Gloucester's win means they are now 5 points from safety, with Darlington and Bishop Stortford remaining in 23rd and 24th. Now on to Saturday the 27th of January, and we'll start at the bottom as 23rd place Darlington were at home to 6th place Hereford. The day before this game, Darlington announced the signing of striker Cedric Main from York, and with Asante completely dropped out of the squad, Main came in to make his debut, and after some excellent work down the right from Main, Johnny Ngandu holds off the defender to allow Liddell to finish off and give Darlington the 1-0 lead. The result was rounded off in the 90th minute by Matt Cornish, and this was a much improved Darlington performance. Having a fit number 9 who can hold the ball up and bring others into play certainly helped, and let's see if Darlington can build on this result. On to another team in the relegation zone getting a win, and that's 22nd place Gloucester, who beat Bishop Stortford 4-1, and that's now back-to-back wins for Gloucester, who put themselves to just 4 points from safety. In the last match they had mentioned about how 20th place Banbury sacked manager Mark Jones, and coach Craig McKay stepped in to take over their game against 3rd place Scarborough, and it was clearly a day for the bottom teams. A massive 1-0 win for Banbury, and considering the results of Gloucester and Darlington below them, this result was even more important, and they are now 4 points above the drop zone. Another club near the bottom who desperately needed a win was Southport, but goals in the 88th and 90th minute saw them lose 3-2 against Alfreton, and with results going against them, they now drop down to 20th, 3 points above safety. After a brief slip up in the last 2 games, Scunthorpe got back to winning ways with a 1-0 win away at Peterborough Sports. However, Scunthorpe suffered a big blow in this game as the goal scorer Connor Roberts, who's been so good this season, was taken off injured, and injuries have really hampered his career, and this is the last thing Scunthorpe needed going into the game against Tamworth on Tuesday night. And moving on to top of the table Tamworth, and while Scunthorpe have lost one of their best players in Connor Roberts to injury, Tamworth have also lost their standout performer in midfielder Jamie Jellis, who leaves to join Walsall, but it didn't appear to affect them too much in this game as Tamworth continue to set a relentless pace at the top. A 2-0 win over Spennymoor to keep the gap to Scunthorpe at 9 points and sets them up very nicely going into the game with Scunthorpe on Tuesday, and will round up the final table after the 4 games on Tuesday. On to Tuesday the 30th of January, and at the time of this recording the games have literally just finished, so I don't have any highlights to show you, but I did just watch the top of the table clash which finished Scunthorpe 0, Tamworth 1. This win puts Tamworth 12 points clear at the top, and there was a number of questionable decisions made by Scunthorpe manager Jimmy Dean. Top scorer Danny Whitehall was on the bench, instead opting for Danny Elliott up front on his own, but nothing was sticking to him. He was getting bullied physically by 2 massive centre-backs, and I personally would have preferred to have seen Whitehall up front with Elliott playing off of him. I think that would have given them a bit more going forward. Winger Connor Roberts was injured, so to replace him he played Alfie Beeston, who is a robust central midfielder. He's not a winger, he has no pace at all, so it's no surprise that he was ineffective on the right. Scunthorpe went down to 10 men in the 53rd minute with left back Tyler Denton being sent off, so at that point he took striker Danny Elliott off and brought on defender Michael Kelly into left back, which left them with no natural striker on the pitch and left them with nothing up top. But for as much as I thought Jimmy Dean got it wrong, the players didn't turn up either. Tamworth on the other hand were compact, they were well organised, they forced so many errors out of Scunthorpe and they created chances, so they rightly sit 12 points clear at the top of the table. As for the other results, Chorley beat Alfreton 3-2, which puts them up into 6th. Hereford missed the chance to get back into the playoffs with a 3-0 defeat against South Shields, and Banbury make it back-to-back wins, beating Darlington 2-1. So the final table at the end of January is Tamworth top, 12 points ahead of Scunthorpe in 2nd, but Scunthorpe do have 2 games in hand. Scarborough, Chester, Brackley, Chorley and Curzon make up the rest of the playoffs. It's all very tight outside the playoffs as 12th place Warrington only sit 3 points away from 7th, 7th, so there's a lot of teams in contention for the playoffs. At the bottom of the table, Bishop Stortford look as good as down. They sit 15 points off safety. Darlington 23rd, 7 points from safety. Gloucester in 22nd, 4 points off safety. And Kings Lynn in 21st, 3 points off safety. So that is the review done with, and I'll be back at the end of February to review some more National League North action.